From bureaus worldwide, this is FSN.
And thanks very much, Catherine. It is a windy and very wet day in Manchester this Tuesday, December 18th, exactly 1 week to go until Christmas Day. I hope you are well. I hope you've had a good old Tuesday. Thanks as always for dropping in on me. Let's get on with the show. Two terrific guests and some hugely important stories will be discussed today. Welcome back.
Welcome back to the most listened to independent radio show in Europe. It's your Richie Allen Show. It's the Richie Allen Show. Broadcasting live on richieallen.co.uk and multiple platforms around the world. And now, here's your host, Richie Allen.
Welcome back then. Gilad Atzmon, the jazz saxophonist, legendary jazz musician and author of books like The Wandering Who and Being in Time, will join me this hour. Hugely important developing story which I've been aware of for the last couple of weeks. Couldn't go to, not print with it, couldn't broadcast it until today. Gilad due to be performing with the Blockheads at the Islington Assembly this coming Friday night, but owing to a complaint by one punter, Gilad has been excluded from playing that gig, which is extraordinary to me. He's played more than 1,000 times with the Blockheads. This is serious. What's going on? We'll dig right down into that with Gilad Atzmon, who joins me in a few minutes' time. And in the second hour, the academic, the author, Kevin Barrett joins me live from Madison, Wisconsin. We'll be touching on some of the themes that I'll be exploring with Gilad and much more besides. Kevin Barrett wings in from Madison, Wisconsin in the second hour. As usual, this is your show. You get to talk to me through Twitter. Tweet me, it's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. As those tweets come in, I will be reading them out as usual. And do get in touch, please. I do love to hear from you. And to gauge your mood, get a feeling, a flavour of what you think about these stories. Okay. Right. And just in case I forget to say it later on, two things. First of all, happy birthday to Jean Ann Crowley, great friend of mine. Friend is an overused word, it really is. It's an oft-used word, and I think real friendship is a rare thing. A wonderful, remarkable human being came into my life about 3.5 years ago and loved to bits by the future Mrs. Allen and myself. Jean Ann celebrates her birthday today. She's in a bar somewhere in Cleggan in the west of Ireland right now, I suppose. I'm guessing she is. She might catch this on a repeat playing a bit later on. Happy birthday, our kid, and many more of them. And this evening I've been invited, and I'm very honoured to have been invited, to speak with Gemma O'Doherty, wonderful Irish journalist whom I've had on this programme a few times in the last couple of years. She's asked me to come on to speak with her on her YouTube channel tonight. She's begun a series of live streams which are brilliant. They really are. She's interviewed a number of men and women. It's been a hugely welcome addition to the independent media, speaking to people on social issues, not just social issues, but geopolitical issues, not just exclusively issues that affect Ireland, but issues around the European Union, around migration, around jobs, and much more. Great lady. You know all about Gemma O'Doherty, of course, very famous journalist. She's invited me to speak with her tonight, and I'll be speaking with her live on her channel around about 8:30 p.m. That's UK time, if you want to check that out a bit later on. Forget about me, you should be checking that out anyway. She's a great, a refreshing voice. Great to have a new voice in the independent media. Now, Gilad Atzmon will be coming on in a few minutes. Some of you got in touch with me today to talk to me about Alice Walker. Now, Alice Walker is a renowned civil rights activist, a renowned author, a renowned poet, and a pretty good egg, I would say, a great human being. I'm not virtue signalling here. I learned of Alice Walker initially, I suppose, through the film, the dramatisation of her book, The Colour Purple. Then I found out a bit more about her, and I've known quite a bit about her over the years. Never interviewed her, tried to get her on various programmes, but couldn't get her on. Anyway, no big deal. The New York Times has gone after, the New York Times has been criticised heavily for interviewing Alice Walker and endorsing anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. That's according to the Washington Post. New York Times assailed for Alice Walker interview endorsing anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist is the Washington Post headline. The Guardian, closer to home, its headline is Alice Walker under fire for praise of anti-Semitic David Icke book. It's according to The Guardian. Basically, the New York Times book review and Alice Walker are getting it in the neck because Alice made comments in an interview with the New York Times when she recommended a book that she had read, a book written by David Icke. She was asked what books are currently on her nightstand, and she mentioned a few books, and one of the books she mentioned was a book written by David Icke called And the Truth Shall Set You Free. The Guardian says that David Icke has long propounded a series of conspiracy theories in his work that many see as anti-Semitic. And they go on to quote various people, including somebody called Yair Rosenberg, who's been very critical of Alice Walker's comment. Okay, Rosenberg has also gone after the New York Times for failing to react to or to qualify the contents of the book to its readers. I don't know what Rosenberg wants. I'm a journalist, as you know, a real journalist, qualified journalist. I don't understand what responsibility the New York Times had. They asked her, what's on your nightstand? Well, I've got this, I've got that. 5 go to Finiston Farm. I've got the latest John Grisham and a book by David Icke. I don't know what the New York Times is supposed to do there. But anyway. Now, something that The Guardian wrote annoyed me. The Guardian wrote, Icke has long claimed that a shadowy cabal controls the world, a familiar anti-Semitic trope. What in the name of Jesus Christ is that all about? What is anti-Semitic about the feeling or the belief or the theory that a tiny group of people are in fact the de facto rulers of the world? That's a long proven theory, right? Any number of academics, not just writers and researchers like David Icke, have written about the control exerted on the world as a whole by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the European Central Bank, controlled by a tiny, tiny group of people. That's a fact. It's not a theory. It's certainly not an anti-Semitic trope. It's got nothing to do with Jews or hatred of Jews or denigration of Jews. It is a fact. So The Guardian quotes Rosenberg. I have no idea if The Guardian contacted davidicke.com for a comment. I have no idea. They are lazy, these publications. It's possible they haven't, but I don't know. I don't know. The Guardian writes it isn't the first time that Alice Walker expressed an affinity for David Icke's work. She mentioned Icke in an interview for the British radio programme Desert Island Discs some years ago. I remember that, back in 2013. So what's happening? Well, what's happening in very simplistic terms is you can't say, I enjoyed that book, made me think a bit. Can't say that. Because you are then guilty by association. Now, that doesn't mean for a minute that David Icke is guilty of anti-Semitism at all. He isn't. But it doesn't matter. He isn't. But just leave that to one side. You read his book. We have decreed him to be unedifying. We have decreed what he says to be untenable. You can't be mentioned in his book. See, Alice Walker is a very important woman. She wrote The Colour Purple. Civil rights activist, knew Dr. King, marched with him, wrote amazing papers, not just books, but papers, poems. Very interesting woman, helped register black voters, of course, stood against the Iraq War, championed women's rights, and the left has loved her, traditionally has loved her. Now, this isn't to knock Alice Walker. Don't hear what you want to hear. Listen to me carefully. I greatly admire Alice Walker. Greatly. So don't misunderstand what I'm going to say next. The left has loved to reference Alice Walker for years. Loved her. Great bit of virtue signalling. Appearing with her whenever they could. Inviting her to their functions and to their rallies whenever they could. Right? But now she's got to be torn down because she dared to read a book and to recommend it. How dare you? What's that you have there? David Icke book. Any good? Yeah, I liked it. Made me think. All right, fair enough. Not for me, really. I'm not interested in conspiracy theories. No, that's not good enough now. It's not good enough. And when this began in earnest, it's not new, of course, now. You know, assassinating people because they said or did something deemed to be unsayable or undoable. We've always had this. But the advent of social media has kind of seen this take on a new life, a life of its own. I've talked a lot about Twitter storms. So what you've had on Twitter is, did Alice Walker name drop David Icke? Did she? She can't do that. She can't do that. So the publisher is bombarded with calls to drop her. Universities are called upon not to invite this incredible woman who's lived through and seen so much. Don't invite her to your universities anymore. She likes David Icke. Can't have that. Can't have it. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. And what's happening? Alice Walker, David Icke, Gilad Atzmon, whom we'll hear from in a minute, are convicted and condemned in the court of public opinion. But have they been? Or are they? In fact, they haven't. Sounds very right, doesn't it? Sounds very proper. They've been convicted and condemned in the court of public opinion. They haven't. They haven't. Because this isn't the court of public opinion. This is not the general, genuine public reacting to this stuff. No, this is far more sinister. Ironically, this is a tiny group of people. A tiny group of people who control what it is you see and don't see on Twitter. So they're not being condemned in the court of public opinion. Because the public, seemingly, likes to go and hear Gilad Atzmon, likes to go and watch David Icke, and will turn up anywhere to hear Alice Walker speak. That's what the public will do. Something else going on here. A tiny group of people, hiding in the shadows, ironically, declare people like the aforementioned guilty of hate, of anti-Semitism, of racism. But they won't face Gilad Atzmon and Alice Walker and David Icke publicly. They won't. They won't level their charges at those people face to face and then give them a chance to defend themselves. They won't. This is akin to being locked up without a trial on the word of a fellow citizen or a neighbour. That's what it is. Guy said this about you, Richie. You'll have to go to prison for 2 weeks. What? Well, I'm sorry, but I've got something to say. It doesn't matter. Somebody said something about you. We don't like it. It's dangerous. You're guilty. You're in prison for 2 weeks. But hang on a second. Don't I get a chance to face that person in a room where I can challenge them? Challenge their evidence that I'm hateful, that I'm anti-Semitic, that I'm a Holocaust fucking denier, which neither Gilad Atzmon or David Icke has ever done. And I'm pretty sure Alice Walker has never done it. No. These are deadly times. These are deadly dangerous times. When this began, this needled me. It annoyed me, it frustrated me, it pissed me off. When this began, this Twitter storming and this demanding that people are publicly flayed, vilified and humiliated because they have done something as benign as say to somebody, yeah, I've read a few books and yeah, this one by David Icke is quite good. Flay her! Destroy her! Demand an apology. Demand she disavow herself of the book that she read and the author. And when all this began, your presenter was a bit pissed off, as I said, a bit annoyed. Now I'm fucking terrified. I am. I'm not annoyed anymore. I'm terrified of where this is leading. And to talk more about this is a genius saxophonist. An unparalleled genius in the world of jazz music in the modern day. A brilliant writer. A man whose work is shot through with self-doubt, with wonder, with awe, with questions of who the hell are we? What is going on in our world? It's never mean-spirited. It's never hateful. It's never marginalising. It's always interesting and thought-provoking. And somebody wrote a letter to Islington Council saying, if Gilad Atzmon is going to be playing sax with the Blockheads this coming Friday at Islington Assembly, well, I won't be going. So please tell me if he is. And if he is, I'm not going to be turning up. Islington Council got back to the person in question and said, don't worry about it, Gilad Atzmon has been banned. He's been banned. He's been excluded. He won't be playing with the Blockheads on Friday. A group he's played with 1,000 times before. Gilad Atzmon joins me in a minute. Music from Def Leppard on the Richie Allen Show for Tuesday. Music from Def Leppard, Animal from Hysteria on the Richie Allen Show. Hysteria, there's a word for you. Hysteria, 20 minutes past the hour. It is December the 18th, 2018. Let's just jump straight into it. Mentioned who my guest is just before that song. Can't say enough about him. Gilad.co.uk. Genius musician, humanitarian, all-around good guy, brilliant writer, thought-provoking, challenging, incisive. As I said, he's writing shot through with self-doubt, which makes it the greatest type of writing, the greatest type of prose you can ever read, when the author takes off all of his clothes, unclothes himself, and says, this is who I am. These are the questions I have. What the hell is going on? He's played 1,000 gigs with the Blockheads. He was due to play with them this coming Friday at Islington Assembly when he learned that there had been a complaint. A man called Martin Rankoff, whom I spoke with briefly today on the telephone, wrote to Islington after writing to the promoter of the concert, asking this man, Martin Rankoff, he's a Jewish man, asking for confirmation that Gilad would be playing sax for the band, saying that if it was true that Gilad was playing, that he would not attend and that he would give his ticket to somebody else. This is important now, because in the email to the promoter, Martin Rankoff, whatever you might think of him, didn't demand that Gilad Atzmon be banned, didn't ask for that, just wanted confirmation that Gilad was going to be playing. He then wrote, the same guy wrote to the council, mentioning that he wasn't complaining, but he wanted clarification about Gilad, saying that he wouldn't attend if indeed Gilad was going to be on stage. He sent some links to the council, links to newspaper articles that have been critical of Gilad in the past. He said he wasn't looking for a refund, that he would give his ticket to other people or somebody else. He just didn't want to share the same oxygen with Gilad Atzmon. Staggeringly, the leader of the council got back to Mr. Rankoff to tell him, worry no more, because Gilad has been banned and won't be playing the gig this coming Friday. And then the leader of the council and the Jewish man, Mr. Rankoff, exchanged a few emails that were triumphant, to say the least. Gilad Atzmon, welcome back to the programme. How are you?
I'm okay. I got used to the idea that I'm at the center of a huge storm. I can see that they are using every vessel, every means within their disposal to destroy me. And I have a feeling that they are really on a wrong track. This can be a very, very dangerous path, especially for the people who engage in these tactics, because as it happens, I obtained all the communication between Mr. Rankoff and the council. I obtained, as I shared it with you this morning, the letter from the the leader of the council, Mr. Watts, who is a Labour member. He's a Labour politician who actually communicate with Mr. Rankoff and guarantee that he will also report to the BOD, which is a kind of a Zionist body that claims to represent British Jews. And the council obviously operated totally unlawfully. They are getting into a lot of trouble. They are in a muddy water. And I will share every bit of information that I have with the public. And by the way, it's a bit of a dissonance for me because, like many other people who care for Palestine, I have a lot of doubts, but I'm sympathetic towards Jeremy Corbyn. But the truth of the matter is that the labor is made of people that are not built to rule. They are Stasi-type characters. They follow the Talmudic harem tactics, something that they've tried with Jesus. It didn't work very well. They made him into a martyr. They tried it with Spinoza. It didn't work very well. We really like Spinoza, and they tried to make me into such a great character, and somehow I like the idea.
Are you still there? Because I can hear you loud and clear. I wasn't sure you'd finished. I want to just, before we get into this, I want to just go through very quickly the chain of events again. This man, Martin Rankoff, whom I spoke with earlier on, he said to me, "What's happened? Have we lost? Have we lost?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back now. You're back.
Okay, okay.
I don't know what happened there. So Martin Rankoff, I spoke with Martin Rankoff earlier on, and when I rang him and left a message, he got back to me, and I spoke to him. It was a fairly pleasant enough exchange. Told him who I was, asked him could he come on the program, and he said he couldn't because he was working. Now, the interesting part about that was he hadn't asked me what time the program was on. He just said, "No, I can't. I'm working." And I said, "Fair enough. Can you give me a comment then? I'd like to get a comment from you, because first of all, you didn't request that Gilad Atzmon be banned. I just want to get a comment on what you hoped to achieve by asking for confirmation that he was going to be on stage from the council." But he wouldn't give me a comment, and he rang off. And I said, "Look, that's okay, but you're going to get a mention on the program today, just in case our listeners are wondering. Due diligence has been done. I've also written to Islington Council and asked for a response just before Gilad comes back in. This man didn't ask for the concert to be cancelled, number one, or for Gilad to be excluded as a band member. This is what's incredibly sinister. This guy Watts, who heads up the council at Islington.
His name is actually, to everybody knows, is Richard Watts.
Richard Watts, yeah.
We obtained, both yourself, because I sent it to you, the emails between Mr. Rankoff and Richard Watts, and this is very interesting because Mr. Rankoff actually exposes
inadvertently
Richard Watts.
Yeah.
And why is he doing it? Because Richard Watts was stupid enough to follow instructions from a Zionist operator who hates his party, who hates the Labour Party. Martin Rankoff Twitter page is suffocated with gross comments about Jeremy Corbyn. He calls Jeremy Corbyn an anti-Semite and so on and so on. I hope that it's kind of not hate speech. He kind of, I obtained a tweet where he kind of think that Corbyn should be pushed off his bike and so on and so on.
That was a joke, though. Hang on a second.
Yeah.
Look, in the interest of full disclosure, for new listeners, and I'm sure we have thousands of new listeners today.
I mentioned that I hope that it's a joke.
Yes.
Yeah?
In the interest of full disclosure, my sympathies lie with Gilad Atzmon. He's a friend. I've known him for a few years. I can't pretend to be objective. But in the absence of these people, the Martin Rankoff tweet about Jeremy Corbyn being knocked off his bike by the police was a joke. People could argue that it was in bad taste, but it was a joke that was referenced around recent news that the police are knocking criminals off their mopeds. It was a silly joke, but it was a joke, and I'm not going to condemn Rankoff for making a joke, but yes.
No, for sure. I mentioned,
Yeah.
as I mentioned that I hope that it was a joke, but
Yeah.
by the way, I mentioned that I hope because the page is suffocated.
He doesn't like Corbyn,
with,
right?
You know, the title, the memes on top of the page is where he calls Corbyn, sorry for my, excuse my French, a fucking anti-Semite and a bigot. So just few posts below, he's talking about pushing the elder Labour candidate for primacyship from his bike. I think that there is an element of truth in it, but obviously, I tend to believe, as I mentioned, that it's a joke. However, the miserable leader of the council went out of his way.
Let me read that. Hang on a second now. So Martin Rankoff then is the man who wrote to the council asking was Gilad going to be on stage. Gilad has quite rightly said that Mr. Rankoff's Twitter feed is full of criticisms of Labour and Jeremy Corbyn and accusations of anti-Semitism. So Mr. Rankoff is not just a bystander. He's somebody who's got a dog in this fight, and he's very vocal as a Jewish, as a British Jewish man, as he's entitled to be, by the way. So he asks the council about Gilad. Listen to this. He was then emailed by Richard Watts, who leads Islington Council for Labour. And this is what he says. Thanks for the email and for bringing this to our attention. Islington Council stands firmly against racism, anti-Semitism, blah, 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 blah. We have adopted the international definition on anti-Semitism, blah, 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 blah. We have today contacted the promoter of the event, both verbally and in writing, to request that Mr. Atzmon does not perform with the Blockheads on December 21st. I have also contacted the Board of Deputies, with whom the council works closely, to update them on our actions following receipt of your email. Now, the Board of Deputies was not eloquently but accurately described by Gilad as a bunch of Zionists. They are. So here's a very important question. What the hell is the leader of Labour, the Labour-run Islington Council doing? Contacting, unsolicited by the way, contacting in an unsolicited fashion the Board of Deputies to talk to them about banning Gilad Atzmon. That deserves to be investigated further, doesn't it?
No, a lot of things deserve to be investigated, and I obviously have a legal team that is working on it, and our consul wrote a very an extended article suggesting that the council operated totally in an unlawful manner. More than that, it is very clear that when the council, and people probably don't know about it, is the first time that I mention it, when the council realized that they are in muddy water, operating unlawfully, and they got a letter from my lawyers, they hired, if not the most expensive, one of the most expensive law firms in this country. They hired the Simpkins, the people who were actually representing Cliff Richard in the last libel case, and I think that it is one of the most expensive, legal costs.
Hey, listen, before we talk about that, very expensive, let's look at the council's own guidelines on what constitutes unlawful behaviour or harassment or discrimination, because they're claiming that they made their decision on you based on clause 50/51 of guidelines that are supposed to be governing live events and stuff. Let me read clause 50 and 51 very briefly, and then you come back in. So folks, if you're just joining us, Islington Town Council has basically decided to exclude Gilad Atzmon, legendary saxophonist. He's been on stage thousands of times with other renowned artists, but particularly the Blockheads, due to play this Friday at Islington Assembly. They said he can't play based on one email from a man whom, whatever you might think of him, did not ask that Gilad Atzmon be banned. The council jumped the gun. Here's clause 50. You must not, in connection with any live event, use, provide or display any material, whether written or spoken, or allow behaviour that constitutes direct or indirect discrimination or harassment, victimisation of, vilification of any person or group of persons on the grounds of race, nationality, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion or age. Now, you couldn't possibly, as the saxophonist for the Blockheads, be in violation of any of that, right? Impossible.
Absolutely. And do you have an access to your email?
I have. I'm on there, yeah.
You're on the email. So you just got an email from me. Can you look at it?
Yeah, from the Blockheads to
to
the promoter.
Apparently, this is apparently the Blockheads came up with an official address, regarding this affair. And I wouldn't mind if you read it, because actually I think that the guy who wrote it, who is actually an original member of the band, who is our kind of leader for that matter, he came with an incredible take on this affair. If you can read it, it will be great.
You want me to read it out, right? So
yeah,
this is an email from the Blockheads, from Mick Gallagher, and he's written this to Alex, who's at the jngroup.com. Is this from Mick from the Blockheads to the promoter?
It's Mickey Gallagher that wrote this today. He was asked to comment for the Jewish news or Israel news or one of these Zionist outlets.
Great. So Alex,
this is what he wrote. Obviously,
I'll read it. Yeah. So Alex is a journalist with a Jewish publication, and this is Mickey Gallagher. He says, "Hi Alex, thank you for reaching out. The Blockheads are outraged at the ruling by Islington Council to ban Gilad from appearing with the band on 21st of December at Islington Assembly Hall. We were contacted by our agent last Tuesday, who told us that Islington Council would cancel the show if we insisted on Gilad playing with the band. This, apparently, was in response to a complaint they had received from someone posing as an avid Blockhead fan, who objected to Gilad's presence on stage with us because of his political views and rhetoric, branding him an anti-Semite. Gilad has never been accused or charged of hate crime by any formal body. The musicians Gilad plays with are all multicultural, including Jewish musicians, and he is highly rated and an integral member of the Blockheads. Gilad plays the saxophone. They said we would be in violation of two clauses, 50 and 51, in their agreement for the renting of the hall." And then he goes on, does Mickey, to reiterate clause 50 and 51. And then he says, "The Blockheads have performed over 1,000 shows with Gilad, 2 at Islington Assembly Hall already, and have never been a threat to anyone. We are entertainers. We do not hold political rallies. As an author, Gilad has criticised Israeli policy, ideology and identity, but does not use Blockhead gigs as a platform for his views. Everyone may not agree with Gilad, but in this country he is supposed to have the right to air his opinions freely and encourage open discussion on matters that are important to him. We feel that Islington Council are enabling the victimisation, harassment and discrimination of Gilad by this illegal ruling, and are indeed in breach of their own Clause 50. Mickey Gallagher for and on behalf of the Blockheads." That's a powerful email there.
It is a powerful comment. I was shocked, because I thought, I know how much Mickey charges for his job. He's definitely cheaper than my lawyers, I can tell you.
It must be nice, right? Look, Clause 50 and 51, we read out Clause 50. It couldn't possibly be in violation of Clause 50.
No, this is the thing. The council knew immediately that they had nothing to offer. So they used this very expensive firm, Simpkins, that created a kind of a zigzagging document that tried to toss the accusation around and to call me names. And in order to call me names, they were quoting everything but myself. They were quoting the Jewish Chronicle that calls me the most awful names. The Yediot Achronot, an Israeli paper, Ynet, the ADL. When I told the Islington Council, listen, this is very nice, it's you have to remember that you are living in Britain. It's not clear to me why you only kind of quoting Israeli and Zionist paper that represent politics of a foreign country. And I told them it is quite amazing because I wrote kind of an appeal and said, I've never been accused by anybody, as Mickey mentioned, of hate speech, hate crime. I've never been questioned about a single thing that I've ever said. On top of that, I am on a list of 100 leading peace voices of the world. My work is endorsed by the most important academics and humanists involved in my field, i.e. identity politics, Middle East politics, and so on and so on. The council then produced an annex, and this is something that I don't know if I sent you, but I will publish everything, I promise, of criticism of the most important academics in Islington, a council in Britain, in London. All their sources are coming from Jerusalem Post, the Jerusalem Post, from a writer, a Jewish writer criticizing academics in the Washington Post, and I'm quite shocked by it. Does it mean that very soon learning Hebrew or Yiddish is going to be compulsory in Islington? And I ask today another question. Since banning me from playing is unlawful, and I live in London, and sometime I am kind of visiting Islington, since this ruling is totally arbitrary, I wonder, can I, for instance, use a public toilet in Islington, kind of that is run by the council? Or is it also going to interfere with the relationship between Jews and others, as they call it? When I drive to East London from my house in Northwest London, can I pass with my car through Islington, or do I have to use the North Circular? I think that it is Talmudic. It is...
What does that mean? Hang on a second. Stop. Hold your horses there. Let me just remind our listeners. Gilad Atzmon is live on the Richie Allen Show. He's a friend of mine. Been speaking to him for years. Often had robust exchanges. There are things that he holds dear that I might not agree with, but it doesn't matter. He's a humanist. He's decent. His work is brilliant. It's never mean-spirited. It's never marginalising, even if you don't agree with it. It's hopeful. It's full of black humour, shot through with self-doubt, wonder, questions. It's great. Read his books. Everybody, no matter where you are, no matter what your identity is, be challenged. Read his books. Hang on now. Talmudic. What do you mean by that? Because there'll be Jewish people listening to this going, here we go again now, this Talmudic shit. Yes, this is just a cover for racism. Go ahead.
I do think that it's a fair answer, and this term needs elaboration. And I'll try to be as quick and precise as I can.
I don't believe you, but go ahead anyway.
In my work, I differentiate between Athens and Jerusalem. Now, this is not a dichotomy that I made. It's a dichotomy that evolved in late 19th century in Germany and was actually introduced to the English-speaking world by Leo Strauss. Athens, in that regards, is the birthplace of philosophy. It is where we think things through. So, for instance, there is an issue, there is a guy who complained. You really make a study, an impartial study of this case of Gilad Atzmon, and based on that, you make a judgment that stands reasoning, that is coherent, consistent, and so on and so on. Jerusalem is the opposite. Jerusalem, within the context of this dichotomy, is the birthplace of revelation. We get a book, we receive a book with laws, and we follow it. And we never ask, we never challenge what are those rules. First, we obey, and this is the clear Talmudic law. First, we obey, and then we may ask. Now, this is exactly how Britain is operating at the moment. We are expected to be obedient, to be, that our behavior will be determined by tyranny of correctness, self-suppression. I spoke today with a great, beautiful journalist who is writing in one of our national papers. And he was very, very concerned with me mentioning names like David Irving or David Icke. Maybe they don't like the Davids when it's not coming with Cohen or Levy or Rabinovich. But the issue is that we are living in an environment that is becoming more and more fearful and less thoughtful. And this is exactly Talmudism. Instead of trying to dig and to find the essence and the truth, we are zigzagging, searching for loopholes between laws that would allow us to operate unethically. So, for instance, the council, this is a classic case, try to employ clause 50 and 51 that have nothing to do neither with myself nor with the blockheads. These are clauses that are basically there to prevent neo-Nazi hateful gathering where people call for violence and discrimination. The blockheads singing about sex and drugs and rock and roll actually is advocating the opposite. And this is what we are doing.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Obviously, my work doesn't fit within clause 50 and 51. Now, what the council did, the council used, in order to justify its act, created the most jaundiced document, full with slander that is taken from Zionist, ultra-Zionist website like the ADL, like Jerusalem Post, like the Jewish Chronicle. Those papers are not committed to the truth. They are committed to Zionist politics. And this is exactly the kind of politics that I'm against, not because I'm against Jews. I'm against a certain form of Jewish identification that translates into oppression.
Yeah, and by citing the Jerusalem Post and the Times of Israel, I mean, it's obviously redundant academically. These are the natural enemies, or those that are bound to be naturally fed up or wound up or offended by your work, which challenges their central ideology. It's ridiculous. And you've made the point already, it bears mentioning again, that these guys at Islington can't point to a critique of your work in the United Kingdom by a journalist in this country that has called you hateful or divisive or polarising or anti-Semitic. It's absolutely scandalous. Let me just remind our listeners, just give us a quick minute there. We're approaching 11 minutes to the top of the hour. By the way, I'm satisfied at least personally, I don't speak for everybody, I'm satisfied with your interpretation of Talmudic in terms of to be Talmudic or to approach something with a Talmudic temperament or point of view. I'm satisfied with that. I personally, and I don't know about our listeners. Gilad Atzmon is our guest, gilad.co.uk, author of The Wandering Who, and of course, Being in Time, Post-Political Manifesto. I've read that 3 times, folks. I genuinely have. I can quote from it liberally. Check it out, because a lot of what we're talking about is investigated and is explored in this particular book. How we've come to be like this, to think like this.
Thank you so much. I just think also that we have to be practical. A friend of mine just put a petition to the council. You can also get to this petition from through my website. I will circulate it later. It's already on my Facebook. And on this petition, you have the emails and the telephone numbers of the council. You can say what you think about this outrageous behavior. And as I mentioned, in the next few days, I will publish the most embarrassing materials that are related to this affair, including the communication between Mr. Rankoff and the leader of the council, Mr. Richard Watts. I think that people have to reconsider their approach to labor. And again, as I mentioned before, we have I share sympathy with many other people to Mr. Corbyn, but I think that he's surrounded by people that not only that they are not ready to lead the country, they are the most dangerous people.
Oh, they are. Well, the momentum movement is as dangerous.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
By the way, I think
right.
that momentum is probably the most. Oh, sorry about it. I think that
Don't worry about it.
Is the most dangerous, kind of political institutional political body, and I tell you why. Because this is exactly the form of Jerusalemism that I am talking about in Being in Time. I argue that those who see themselves as progressives actually subscribe to a very dangerous exceptionalist discourse.
There's nothing progressive about it, Gilad. There is no. It's a bastardization of the word progressive. It is not progressive.
Absolutely. And the explanation that what is the problem of chosenism? Because when you see yourself as a chosen people, which is something that actually secular Jews sometimes fall into this trap, more than religious Jews, but Orthodox Jews, actually, funny enough, is when you see yourself as chosen and you look down at the other. What does it mean that you see yourself a progressive character? It means that you look down at the other and see him or her as reactionary. This explains why so many Jews who left Judaism started to identify themselves as progressives. They actually converted into a very similar religion where they could celebrate different form of exceptionalism. And this is exactly what I see with the vast majority of momentum operators. It is not a genuine truth.
No, it's tyrannical. Can I come in here? Because I've got to do a summing up. I know we've got about 10 minutes left to talk, but I want to do a quick summing up so far. It is tyrannical. And as brilliant academics like Stuart Waiton at Abertay University in Dundee has been writing about recently, they're creating more and more and more so-called vulnerable groups identifying more and more and more vulnerable groups within society. It's almost like gremlins. It's like the Mogwai in the film Gremlins. Throw water on the Mogwai and you get 20 more. So if you identify one group as an identity group that is vulnerable and needs protecting, out of that group comes 10 more. And pretty soon, nobody can ever speak about anybody or anything. Gilad Atzmon is our guest. Don't need to say it. Genius musician, brilliant writer. Was due to play with the Blockheads this Friday at Islington Assembly. He's played with them 1,000 times. He's an amazing musician. I've never had the pleasure of seeing him live, but I've listened to him. He's brilliant. My missus plays the saxophone and the clarinet. She tells me he's a genius. That's good enough for me. He's a top man. He should be there on Friday. A gentleman called Mr. Martin Rankoff contacted the Islington Council and said, listen, is it true that Gilad Atzmon will be playing the sax for the Blockheads? Just tell me if it is, because if it is, I don't want to go, but I'd rather give my ticket to somebody else. The council got back to him in the guise of Richard Watts, the council leader, to say, don't worry about it. Gilad has been banned. He won't be playing there. And I've also told the Board of Deputies, which is a Zionist group, of course, as we all know. So don't worry about it. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. They then said to Gilad through another man called Martin Bevis, whom I contacted today, he wouldn't come on. Well, he's not responded to my invitation to come on the programme.
By the way, according to my lawyer, it is more than likely, we are pretty convinced, that it wasn't Martin Bevis who wrote the answer by the council. He just signed on it. And we are waiting to hear from Simpkins, from the lawyer who represents the council, who really wrote this letter.
Now, the council could be saddling taxpayers with a bill that could be 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 grand because they didn't send a letter back to Mr. Rankoff, which would have been pretty simple. Dear Mr. Rankoff, thanks for your inquiry. Yes, we can confirm Gilad Atzmon plays sax for the Blockheads. That's all they had to do. And we're sorry that you don't want to come, but that's your choice, Mr. Rankoff. Bye-bye. They've not done that. They've excluded you or attempted to exclude you. We've still got a few days till Friday. And because you've quite rightly legally said, hang on, no, I'm not accepting that, they've had to employ a brief. That brief comes in the form of a very expensive firm who've represented Cliff Richard and could now saddle the taxpayers of Islington Council, that area basically, with thousands and thousands. What is going to happen? Are you going to play with the Blockheads on Friday? What's going to happen?
The situation is not that dramatic because
it is dramatic.
There are various saxophonists who dep me in the Blockheads because I'm touring a lot, playing my music. In fact, I was actually supposed to be in the Northwest that night. I canceled it in order to be in London. But we are dealing now with a principal issue that extends way beyond Mr. Rankoff or this compromised leader of the council and so on and so on. We are dealing with local authorities becoming tyrannical and authoritarians. And this is something that we see in every borough and every council. And this is something that we have to address because I tend to believe that actually quite troubling politics is becoming invasive, and what we saw in Islington is actually just a symptom.
Can I ask you this? There is a terrifying development in China that we've been talking about on this program for a number of years. The introduction of a social crediting system where people deemed to have committed various offences, you know, not criminal offences now, but people who have been deemed to be antisocial in one way or another, maybe not neighbourly, maybe a bit late paying a bill, maybe they were caught urinating some night after they came out of the pub on a bush, maybe, and they can have the right to travel taken away from them, and they can have their bank accounts frozen. This is beyond Huxley or Orwell. What we're seeing with the Islington Town Council decision is the pathway to a lunatic asylum future, where not just because you criticise Israel or Jewish identity, but because you're just not prepared to accept that a man in a dress, but with a big whacking great penis in his underpants, is not a woman. Even if he says that he is, he's not. I'm not going to hate the guy. I'm not going to impede the guy. I'm going to call him Amanda if he wants me to call him Amanda. But I don't think he's a woman. I think he's a man. Eventually, this is where that leads. Well, we can't have Richie Allen chairing that debate between Gilad Atzmon and the leader of the Jewish Chronicle on Friday. Why can't we have Richie Allen chairing debate? He's fairly impartial. He'll have a good go. Well, he doesn't like transgenders. That's where we're going, right? That's where we're going. We're there. We're there.
I think that you are totally right, and I think that I probably wrote one of the best books about this transition.
The best book about this transition.
This is Being in Time, and I argue that this very dangerous development starts somewhere with Wilhelm Reich, with the Frankfurt School, with those whom some people refer to as cultural Marxists, but there are different ways to look about it. I don't have a problem with this definition of cultural Marxists. People who try to bring the revolution by cultural means, but rather than dialectical materialism, and I think that society is now divided, and we see it everywhere. We see it in France, we see it in America, we see it in Britain. Basically, the debate on Brexit is maybe very similar. Society is divided between those who identified as it's a category of the as a people. They identify as a woman, as a woman, as a Jew, as a black, as a transsexual, as a gay, and the others who identify with the soul. So they are British, and those or the Americans or French, and those British, American, and French, they can be women and men and transsexual and everything. They just identify with a piece of land. They identify with a national identity, and so on and so on. When you look at the map of America now, the demography of America, you see a kind of a tiny blue colors in the seashore, and the rest of America is red. This political division is actually a clear cultural, metaphysical split. We see exactly the same thing in France. We see it in every country in the West, and I think that, and maybe it's kind of not the way to finish. It should be a beginning of a kind of a discussion between us. I think that World War III is actually here, and it is not a battle across borders or between countries. It's a battle that divides countries into two. It divides societies. It even divides families. And we see it, and it's here. By the way, even my family is divided on this front. So it is very, very interesting, and I agree with you. We are the people who are what we call cultural Marxists or Frankfurt Schoolers or identitarians. This is another name for them. Are very excited about this Chinese form of of exclusion,
social crediting. Social
crediting, and. My solution, and maybe kind of you'll probably kick me out after that.
No.
My solution for this problem, these issues is very simple. If we want to remove ourselves, to liberate ourselves, to redeem ourselves from this horrendous dystopia, we must at once stop looking for that which divide us, which separate us between men and women, between white and black, between transsexual and gays and heterosexual. We have to look for that which unite us, which make us into one, into human beings. And these things are very simple. It is work, manufacturing, so we have a good reason to work in the to wake up in the morning. It is health. So if you know that if you don't feel very well, and it can happen, it happened to everyone, somebody will look after you. It's education, and so on and so on and so on. These were the issues that left used to care for. Nowadays, the left, instead of uniting us around those issues, it is doing the opposite.
Yeah, it's a great irony.
Fighting against each other.
It's a great irony. At one time, the left was the base for the promotion of free speech and a free exchange of ideas, and the right was all for, or more for, censoring and putting people and ideas down. Now it's reversed. Look, I've just tweeted the petition, by the way. Folks, go to gilad.co.uk to read more about this. Let's hope that justice is done. And that's not an exaggeration. Justice is the right term to use here. This is a vital issue, this. And that he is in his rightful place on stage in Islington Assembly on Friday night, playing sax with a brilliant band that he's played with for years. Sign that petition. Being in time is, and even if he did sound a little bit arrogant, you didn't, by the way, but I thought it was brilliant, that it is the definitive book on the subject of identity politics and the damage that it is doing to democracy, to free thought, to free speech. Get a copy of Being in Time and read it. I've read it several times. I've endorsed it. I'll endorse it again. I might even get a couple of copies off of Gilad and run a competition, maybe after Christmas.
I'll send you as many as you want.
Yes, as long as people start buying it. Start buying it, and then I'll get some copies and I'll do a competition. Gilad.co.uk. Thanks for coming on, mate. You tackle these things with great humour. And look after yourself, right?
Support,
and Merry Christmas. Anytime, Gilad. Bye for now. Let's hope that gets sorted out. It's with the lawyers now. But do sign the petition. It can be found now on our Twitter page. It can be found at gilad.co.uk. Check out Gilad Atzmon's website, gilad.co.uk. And don't tolerate this, folks. We can't tolerate it. Where a council can say, because a man wanted to know, is the musician playing? If he is, I'm going to give away my ticket. He should have been told, well, he is. We're sorry to hear you feel like that, Mr. Rankoff, but, tough cookies. That's the way it is, right? No, they cancelled him, or they said he can't play. He can't play, citing some bullshit clause 50, which is completely irrelevant, as the man plays the sax. He's not Bob Geldof. He's not Bono. He doesn't drop the sax and start lecturing the audience about gender politics or geopolitics. He plays the sax. That's what he does. Brilliantly. Right? People turn up to Islington Assembly on Friday expecting to dance, to jump up and down, to sing along, to have a few beers, to have a good laugh. They're not going to be lectured in geopolitics or on Jewish identity. Can't allow it, folks. Because if we tolerate it, even if you despise Gilad Atzmon, if you disagree with his opinions, yes, by all means do. But you have to stand up for him. You have to stand up for him. We can't have it. That's all I'm saying on that for now. Kevin Barrett will be live from Madison, Wisconsin in a minute. And Kevin will be talking about this. He wants to talk about the Alice Walker storm as well. This nonsense that Alice Walker, who name-dropped a book that she'd read by David Icke, now she has to cleanse her soul in the public glare because a few morons on Twitter weren't happy that the great civil rights activist said that she read a book by David Icke. Oh, holy Jesus, bring down the government. She read a book by David Icke, huh? 7.5 minutes past the hour. We're going to get Kevin on, and he's going to be with me for most of the rest of the time on the programme. I've not got any Blockheads music. I could have dug some out, but it's going to take me a couple of minutes. So I've just dug out some Bob Seeger. A bit of Bob Seeger. Hi to Patricia Braunschweiler. How you doing, Patricia? Thanks for those tweets, by the way. Hi to Faisal, to Bob Stew, to Adrienne. Speaking of geniuses, this man is a proper genius. Bob Seeger on the Richie Allen Show. 10 minutes past the hour for Tuesday, December 18th, 2018. The petition, which I mentioned, is on Gilad Atzmon's website, gilad.co.uk. I've tweeted it out. Sign it if you can. Don't accept it, because it's going to be you next. It really is going to be you. Not that you play the saxophone or the guitar. You might well do. I know some of my listeners, Faisal, I think, plays some instruments. I think I've heard him say that before. And one or two others are pretty au fait with a banjo or a violin. But even if you're not, it's going to be you next, you know. You're going to be excluded from a job. You're going to be excluded from applying for a loan or a mortgage because somewhere along the line or down the road you've said something on Twitter. You've expressed an opinion from the heart. Whether you were right or not doesn't matter. 'Twas an opinion. Purge your YouTube, your Twitter channels, accounts, folks. Purge them. Richie, I won't, because I'm only giving in to the establishment. I don't care. If you're going to apply for a job in the next few weeks, if you're going to apply for something, you purge your Twitter account. I'm telling you, because this is where we're at right now. My next guest is another genius. Multilingual, polyglot, I would call the man. Great academic and author. He's also a pretty mean broadcaster as well. Truthjihad.com. Check him out. Been speaking to him for many, many years. He knows exactly what it's like to be targeted, to have his job threatened, to be demonised, to be hounded because he expressed an opinion. Nobody knows better. Let's welcome back to the programme the great Kevin Barrett. Kevin, welcome back. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much, Richie. I love coming on your show, and I just love your show in general.
You're a gentleman for saying that. Gilad Atzmon due to play with the legendary Blockheads in London on Friday. A Jewish man asked the local council, is it true that Gilad Atzmon will be on stage? Please tell me. If so, I won't be attending and I will give my ticket to somebody else. It could be argued that the Jewish man's a moron. It could also be argued that he's entitled to say, I don't want to share space with somebody whom I don't like. Fair play to him. He didn't ask for anything at all, but the council got back to him in the guise of the Labour leader of the council, a man called Mr. Richard Watts, and said, not only will we ban Mr. Atzmon from playing on stage on Friday, but I've also informed the Board of Deputies. It's a Jewish group, a Zionist group in the UK. Kevin, you're a wonderful man. You don't use bad language. I'm prone to use it from time to time, but when I can't avoid it. I'm going to use it here. We're fucked, Kevin, aren't we?
It's starting to look that way, Richie. You know, speaking of bad language and behavior, back before I was a Muslim, when I was a punk rock singer, and that's quite a long time ago, I remember loving Ian Drury and the Blockheads.
Yeah.
And their anthem song at that time was Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. Well, if they were coming to play that in my neighborhood as a Muslim, I would have to make sure that they were all banned, right? Wrong. I'm not that stupid and intolerant, but apparently some of the Jewish folks in the UK are.
They are. But in this case, we don't, well, I don't, and I know you don't, my friend, I know you don't, but I would urge my listeners not to be cheap and try and score points against the Zionists, because Mr. Rankoff exercised his human right to ask a question, is this guy on sax? I don't particularly like him, so if he is on sax, I won't be attending. That's his right. We reserve our ire for the council to make a tyrannical decision like that and to say, no, he can't now play because one guy is cheesed off at his presence. A saxophonist, not a man who's going to do a Bono on it or a Bob Geldof on it and stop the concert and say, oh, by the way, let me bore you to death with my political opinions. No, a guy who plays the sax. The council needs to take the criticism here, Kevin.
Well, Gilad is really good at getting banned. When I hosted him here in Madison, Wisconsin for maybe the 5th or 6th time last spring, and he's the only person I host anymore. I'd stopped doing events. It's really hard to beat the Zionist mafia and actually have a successful event here. But Gilad is so cool that I'll have an event, even if only 3 people show up. just to get a chance to see Gilad. And so he comes through here pretty much once a year. And last time he came here, we were at the Wilmar Center, a community center in Madison, Wisconsin. We're all set to go. And then a few days before the event, it was a speaking event, actually, with a little musical accompaniment. They canceled us, and it was the same situation. The local Zionist mafia or some member thereof had complained to the management of the community center, and they were terrified of having trouble and losing money, and so they banned Gilad. So we had to have the event in the park outside the community center. And Gilad is great. He's not a racist, obviously. There's not a shred of racism in this guy whatsoever. He has a problem with certain aspects of Jewish culture, and that's his right. I don't agree with him on everything, but I think his discourse is pretty rational. I mean, if they're going to ban him, we're really having problems. Banning hardcore, hateful neo-Nazi types who really do hate groups based on their genetic origin, that's one thing. I don't really like banning anybody. But banning somebody like Gilad, a philosopher and a statesman and a gentleman, I mean, that's totally ridiculous.
Yeah, and to be fair to Kevin Barrett, Kevin, of course, some years ago converted to Islam. Kevin is quite happy to engage with people who question Islamic ideology and who criticize the interpretation of Islam. He's happy to go along with that. You don't hear Kevin demanding that morons like Tommy Robinson are banned or are jailed or are ostracized. Kevin Barrett's very consistent on that point. Again, in the interest of full disclosure, because we have new listeners, I'm sure we have. I welcome Jewish listeners to the programme who've not heard it before but were fascinated enough to tune in today because of this subject matter. In the interest of full disclosure, I like Kevin Barrett, I read him, I listen to him, and I have sympathy with the opinions, or empathy with many of the opinions that Kevin expresses, in the interest of full disclosure. Now, in the interest of impartiality, there are no Jewish people here. A Jewish person will say to me, you know what, Richie? Kevin Barrett and Gilad Atzmon are very smart men. They're brilliantly well written, they are very well spoken, and they are charismatic. They throw words around like Zionism and the Talmud. Really, Richie, Atzmon, Barrett, Ike and all the rest of them, really they hate Jews. They blame Jews for everything. They cover that up very well, but that's their basic mantra. Kevin, do you hate Jews? Do you blame Jews for everything?
I don't think so, Richie. Throughout most of my life, I had a disproportionate number of Jewish friends and still do. The only guy from my San Francisco days I'm still in touch with is like the last really poor Jew in America, I think. He lives in a vehicle on the street. He's a bit of an intellectual. And, I really, when I was first doing 9/11 stuff, I saw that Israel would gain from it, but I was talking mostly about Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld and George Bush and not really saying anything even about Israel. And suddenly I got this wave of attacks of people calling me an anti-Semite and a friend of Holocaust deniers and naming these Holocaust deniers I hadn't even heard of. This went up on my Wikipedia page. It's all complete fabrication sourced to some obscure blog that just made it up. And I couldn't get that off my Wikipedia page. So at that point, I said, wait a minute, I'm blaming the U.S. government for 9/11, and I'm being inundated by hate speech from Zionists who were calling me an anti-Semite for saying that the U.S. government did 9/11. What's going on here? And that got me interested in that aspect of 9/11, which led me to an interest in the deeper issues that Gilad explores and that I think are best explored in the book From Yahweh to Zion by the French historian Laurent Guyonneau. I translated that book and published it last year, and it's a masterpiece. And there is, quote unquote, what we might call a Jewish question. That is, the ways that Jewish communities have interacted with their neighbors down through history has been problematic on both sides. And you can't blame the vast majority of members of Jewish communities for most of these problems. What you can blame is community leadership, just like you can blame the leadership of the United States for the wars and genocides that plagued this country's history. You can blame the leadership of Jewish communities at many times and places through history for mistreating their neighbors. Yeah. And, it's not just the Jews who are persecuted. Jews themselves, led by these bad community leaders, persecute goys or non-Jews. It's a two-way street. And simply for saying that, I'm essentially committing heresy, because the established religion in today's secular world, really, is some kind of worship of the Jewish people. Sandra Lubarsky, a Jewish studies professor who collaborated with me on the book 9/11 and Empire Volume 2, told me this. She said that Judaism today is about worshiping the Jewish people. We don't worship God anymore. We worship the Jewish people. And I was appalled, but I wasn't all that surprised by that point. So there are various problems in Jewish history and culture. We should be allowed to talk about these rationally, not with hatred or malice, but simply in an attempt to solve some of the problems that have come down to us today, including the wars that the United States military has been hijacked by Israel to fight around the world that have killed 60 million Muslims since 9/11, according to the Jewish scholar and historian Dr. Gideon Polya of Australia. So there are some serious problems here, and they're trying to make sure we don't talk about them because apparently they want to keep having those problems.
Now, Jewish men and women might say, all right, I'll take that at face value, but why is there such an almost exclusive in the independent media focus on the alleged crimes or bad deeds, as it were, of the Israeli government? The Jews will say bad behaviour by governments, counter-terrorism, supplying terrorist groups with weaponry and with money is not the exclusive domain of the Israeli government. It happens all around the world. The Israelis are no greater exponents of that sort of thing or lesser exponents of that sort of thing than other governments. Why the obsession with Israel? That's what Jews will say. Look, you and I, again, I'm doing this because there's nobody else here to put this to Kevin. I've had these conversations with Kevin for years, and I believe his sincerity. But in the absence of any Jewish presence on the programme or Israeli presence, they'll say, and I think they have a point, why this obsession with Israel's crimes? What about everybody else?
Well, I think I sort of feel that way myself sometimes when I look at people like Gilad, who focus almost exclusively on these issues. I don't. I focus on a lot of abuse of power issues. If you look at my work, it's far from being all about Zionism. But Zionism is a big part of it. Why is that? Well, that's because I think it is a really big, important issue. I don't think I'm giving it disproportionate attention at all. There are two reasons for that, Richie. One is that the so-called State of Israel is the last settler colony on Earth. The biggest single injustice of the past several centuries has been European settler colonialism. The worst abuses of people committed over these past couple centuries include the looting and extermination of people in places like French Algeria, where 1 million people had to die to free their country. In southern Africa, in places like Rhodesia, and in Kenya as well, where settlers went and brutally mistreated natives. So European colonialism in general and settler colonialism in particular are really the historical factor that has smashed our world up into these two parts, sort of the West and the rest. And that's the big conflict today, economically, geopolitically, and so on. So-called Israel is the last settler colony. The most, the settler colonies being the purest distillation of the evil of European colonialism. Yeah. When it is shut down and when Palestine is liberated, a chapter in history will have ended. And it's a horrible chapter, and we need to end it as soon as possible. So that's one reason. Israel is the last settler colony. The second reason, perhaps even more important, Richie, is the religious importance of this Holy Land. This Holy Land belongs to all of the world's Abrahamic monotheists. There are about 4.5 billion of us. We represent about half or a little more of the world's population. This land is sacred to us, whether we are Christians or Muslims or Jews. Jews make up a minuscule, vanishingly small percentage of the world's Abrahamic monotheists. There are perhaps 15 million Jews, probably a lot fewer than that, actually, if you count religious Jews. Maybe there are 5 million religious Jews on Earth. And they've hijacked the Holy Land of more than 4 billion people. And this cannot stand. They're surrounded by Muslim cultures that are still pretty religious, and that are never going to stand for a new bunch of crusaders who, like the earlier crusaders, came and committed genocide in their Holy Land, because this Holy Land has been administered by Muslims for the benefit of not just Muslims, but also Christians and Jews ever since Islam existed. We will never allow this to stand. So this problem is not going to go away, and it is at the very center of the biggest problems on Earth today, the problems that are driving us to destruction. That's why it deserves a lot of attention.
Yeah, I'll accept that. Look, more than 4 billion people have no desire to relocate to the area, but yes, I hear you, loud and clear. Dr. Kevin Barrett is our guest this hour, folks. truthjihad.com, you got to check it out. I want to talk about something I began the show with back in the very brief monologue today. Alice Walker, of course, very well-known author, poet, civil rights activist, you could say feminist, I suppose, as well. A great advocate for women's rights, marched with Dr. King. I think a pretty special woman. Never got to interview her, invited her a couple of times on the programme. Never heard back from her. She's under the gun, as it were. Maybe it's not the nicest phraseology, but she was interviewed by the New York Times, and she had the temerity to mention, when asked what books were next to her bed, I think something along those lines, she named a book that David Icke wrote many years ago, and there's been a Twitter storm. And this, of course, segues nicely after we talked about what's been happening to Gilad Atzmon, because it is the result of these Twitter storms, where these things lead. You've been following this. People have been calling for her publisher to disown her, for universities not to take her on to campus anymore, to speak to students. Incredibly crazy that, when you think of the experience of this woman, because she said, I read a David Icke book and I got something out of it. Kevin, what's going on?
Our culture has gone completely crazy, Richie. You know, again, whether or not you agree with everything David Icke says, like, you know, whether or not you agree with everything Gilad Atzmon says, you have to admit that those two guys are really interesting, thought-provoking, liberating people to engage with, even if you were trying to engage against them. Our culture has lost it. You know, like Gilad says, we used to be Athens. Athens wasn't, you know, kind and gentle. They fought wars, but they had interesting debates going on. They gave us philosophy. Now we can't debate anymore. They just want to silence us and enforce some kind of new fundamentalist, secular religious paradigm. And it's getting really tiresome, but it's almost, when it comes to, you know, gets to somebody like Alice Walker, who's going to be banned from polite company for having a David Icke book on her shelf and liking it. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, if I were writing a parody of the degeneration of the West, I couldn't do better than that.
Kevin, it's bad enough. It's one thing that writers writing for the Washington Post, not just the Post, but other papers, are writing about this. We can accept that some writers are going to be critical of Alice Walker. What's genuinely scary to me, and we don't do fear porn, you certainly don't, and I don't, but this keeps me up at nights. Where are the opinion piece writers, the columnists, writing, this is bollocks, Alice Walker can read what she bloody well wants? Where are those writers, Kevin? To just back this away.
Two of us here.
Yeah, but I'm not. I mean, you're a proper. You can write. You're a very good. I don't write so much. I just broadcast. But within the mainstream media, you would think there are at least a couple of dozen men and women who will write, listen, stop this nonsense. Alice Walker is a great lady. Even if we think she's eccentric because she likes to read David Icke or Jim Mars or Jordan or whatever, she's a great lady. She can read what she wants. Where are those writers in the mainstream? It's terrifying, this.
Indeed. There may be one. I wouldn't be surprised if one or two such writers appear somewhere, probably off in the back pages of some publication. But it should be at least 50-50. One would think that there would be, as you say, many, many, many writers who would see the absurdity of this and be courageous enough to say so. And especially because the attack on Alice Walker and on David Icke is so mendacious. You know, for instance, in the article, I believe it was in the Washington Post, and I think this is being quoted, maybe it actually came from the ADL or someplace like that. They're calling David Icke as being widely viewed as anti-Semitic. And so they have a link to back up that assertion. If you click on the link, what you get is John Ronson's 2001 article.
Remember that?
Making fun of the morons, the ADL-type morons in Vancouver who tried to stop David Icke from speaking back then because they thought that when he talked about lizards from space, he was referring to Jews. And John Ronson is making fun not only of David Icke, but he's making fun even more of those morons. And those are precisely the same morons who are now attacking Icke and Alice Walker. So they're supporting their assertion with a link that actually, if you go to that link and read it, it blows up their assertion. But they just assume that you're not going to bother. And of course, 99% of readers won't. That's just one example of the lies and distortions in this smear attempt against Alice Walker and David Icke.
That's a brilliant bit of research you did there. I didn't realise that the post linked to John Ronson. It's brilliant for two reasons. You've mentioned one, but Ronson and Louis Theroux, who's a very well-known BBC presenter, whom I like. I have a lot of time for his approach. He's kind of awkward approach to investigating subgenres and subcultures. I have no problem with Theroux at all. I like him. And Theroux, of course, is Jewish, and he said that he's never believed that Icke was playing games by using lizards as a metaphor for Jews. He's not. And anybody who knows David Icke, I lived with the man for the best part of a year and worked closely with him. This has been widely debunked, this idea that lizards actually means Jews. First of all, whatever anybody might think about David Icke, whether they like him or dislike him, whether they've met him or not, he's not a coward. If he meant Jews, he wouldn't use a reptilian metaphor. David believes the reptilian theory in terms of the nature of the universe, the creation of us, where we came from. This is genuine. He believes that. That's been widely discredited anyway. And recently, as far as I can understand, national radio networks, at least one anyway in the UK, in the form of Eamon Holmes, a very famous Irish broadcaster, they've had David Icke on talk radio, a national station, speaking to him fairly in a very genial way, asking him about his theories on all manner of things. So to say that it's widely believed that he's some crackpot anti-Semite is nonsense. That's not true. In fact, his stock has probably never been higher. When he speaks around the country and around Europe, he generally sells out pretty sizable theatres of people who want to hear what he has to say. So it is monumental bollocks to suggest that it is widely believed that he's anti-Semitic. Does Alice Walker need to be a bit stronger defending herself here, Kevin? What do you think?
Well, I wish she would be. It's been widely rumored in the 9/11 Truth Movement ever since I got there, which was in, say, 2005 or so.
That might be Alice.
Yeah. It's been rumored that she was a closet 9/11 truther. And I'm pretty sure she is, because my sources there are pretty trustworthy. But she's never really come out strongly for 9/11 Truth and, made a clear statement. I wish she would. I wish she would come out and express herself. I think she probably is a little overwhelmed by the celebrity that she earned. I think it was well earned. But suddenly, she comes from a pretty humble background, and now she's a celebrity in high society. And she's probably a little bit intimidated by the people around her, and especially if they're threatening to lynch her, which they kind of are at this point.
Yeah, metaphorically.
Yeah. I mean, I wish she would just say the heck with it. I'm just going to speak my mind, and if they don't like it, that's their problem. But a lot of people really worry about what other people think about them. That's the great thing about the Malamati Sufi tradition, Richie, which is a very interesting religious tradition around the Islamic world, and particularly in Morocco. I studied a little bit for my dissertation. That's a tradition that's the whole spiritual path is all about reaching the point that the only opinion you care about is God's. And some of these people exaggerate in their efforts to draw opprobrium upon themselves in order to demonstrate that the only opinion they care about is God's. And I think we need a lot more of that. We need more Malamati thought. And it'd be great if Alice Walker would join that.
That culture again, Kevin. Can you name that again, because I didn't quite get it?
Yeah, it's spelled Malamati, Malamati, the Malamati Sufi tradition.
I love it. I look into it because I've lived when I began on commercial radio years ago, I was very, very sensitive in the early days to criticism, especially from the public, which generally came, this will tell you how long ago now, it came in the form of snail mail. So it was kind of dreadful because somebody else would read it. See, somebody else would read that Richie Allen is rubbish, he's garbage. Why do you have him on in the evening? He is crap. And it was bad enough to read that. It was even worse knowing that other people had read it before it got to me, right? So I was overly sensitive and didn't know how to handle criticism. I grew up very quickly and realised that the only criticism that mattered was from the people who employed me, because they weren't idiots, and a lot of money was riding on the success of the station, and I learned to accept it and to embrace it. And now I laugh. I get a lot of criticism now and I enjoy it, especially the really abusive stuff. Just makes me laugh. There's a great thing, thicker skin. So let's stay with that theme for a minute. Kevin Barrett is our guest live from Madison, Wisconsin. He's a learned man, folks. He's a humble man. There aren't enough Kevin Barretts teaching at universities anymore. Pay attention to him. truthjihad.com. He's my guest this hour, and he'll stay with me, Kevin, hopefully, as long as he can, towards the end of this hour, the end of the programme. Now, let's stay with the theme of worrying about what people think about you. Surely, with the reliance on mobile phones and tablets and the internet, surely we are engineering, we are breeding a whole generation of youngsters, Kevin, who are narcissists or narcissistic in behaviour and can't live with or can't learn to live with criticism, with disagreement, with robust debate. Is that what's happening? Are we seeing more of this? You're a great guy to ask. You lectured at university level and did all that. Are we now seeing the creation of autonomous narcissistic people who cannot live with their ideas being challenged?
That's certainly possible, Richie. It does seem to be getting worse. I can imagine why this move to social media would have these effects, because, you know, we're all naturally kind of narcissistic or egotistical anyway, and we're hardwired to care what other people think of us. I guess maybe psychopaths and other, there's certain people who are born with less of that, and some of it is in bad ways. But most people just naturally sort of shudder and have an inner, negative emotional experience when somebody says something bad about them, and are constantly monitoring everything they do and everything that goes on based on how does this play for me? It's like the joke about the old your Jewish uncle whose first thing he always says about everything is, but is it good for the Jews? Well, we all have a little Jewish uncle in our own brains saying, is this good for me? Me. Yeah, and so we're all like that. We always have been, probably, except those who've undergone rigorous Malamati Sufi training. But anyway, I think that with the social media, it's got so, people are getting these messages that just pop up on your screen all the time, and you have to be operating in the present moment, constantly deflecting all of these messages without having a lot of time to kind of cool off and, contemplate and think things through or, whatever. And so I think that these emotional reactions to these messages get out of control, and there gets to be a lot more heat than light. This is a downside of the internet. Ever since we had the internet, even before most people had it, those of us in the academy who were using it noticed the propensity to have flame wars, where you react against something somebody said about you or to you, and you go off on them and they go off on you, and you BCC everybody, and you drag a whole group of people into an unproductive fight. And I think the medium does this to us, because in the old days when you were writing letters and writing on typewriters and things like when books were produced through typesetting and things like that, it took a long time to get anything into print. And so you would relax and think about it and contemplate and then organize what you had to say. And it would come out a lot more structured. It would be a better argument. It wouldn't be all emotional and narcissistic. So, yeah, I think that this kind of social media that we have today, especially with the instant attention to each message, where you don't have time to, take a walk, go away and, spend 3 weeks writing a learned rebuttal to it. Instead, you just go off on them the way they went off on you. This is really fostering our worst instincts.
It's a Stockholm Syndrome thing, I think, because in my opinion, and I cannot express what I feel as eloquently as you, and I'm not fishing for compliments, I cannot. You have an amazing way of explaining stuff. I feel that the establishment loves this. The establishment is telling children, you can. So the establishment is speaking to a child and saying, you can live life on your own terms. we will decree it to be so. We will create the environment for you to live your life on your terms, for you to believe whatever you want and for it to be right, for you to experience life on your terms. And of course, that's a wonderful thing for the establishment, isn't it, Kevin? We will provide that. We will provide that blanket, that cloak of security. And then, as a species, we are in serious trouble. Now, I've probably made a complete balls of explaining that, but I hope that some people understood it. That's what's happening. We see it with university, safe spaces. Come and experience university on your terms. Kevin, I didn't experience university on my terms. I was criticised. I was told a million times that I was wrong. I was told, go and write that again, you fucking idiot. All right, I will. Think about this and think about that. And I did. And it was great. It was of great benefit to me. Not some, maybe spiritually, maybe to a degree, but academically and in terms of my emotional growth, it was good for me. Now the establishment is saying to people, well, you don't have to go through all of that. We will give you life on your terms. Do you get me, or am I talking complete bollocks?
No, you're absolutely right, Richie. But I can challenge you, though, and give you something, a perspective on this that you may disagree with, which would be great. Then we can have a little argument, as we sometimes do about the topic of religion, because I think that you're absolutely right. The concern for security and safety, and safe spaces, and all of this nonsense that's pandering to people's wanting to be a safe little cocoon of their own making, and nothing can happen in my little cocoon. This obsession with security, I believe, is the product of a secular world in which we no longer realize that the reason we're here on Earth is not just to be safe for a while until we inevitably fall apart and experience great pain and die, because that's basically what the world is if you're a secular materialist. But the real purpose of life is training for eternity, because when you die, your consciousness walks off into eternity. And I'm not just saying this is a Muslim talking about the fire in the garden. Go read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where the Tibetan Buddhists train people in how to guide the dying person through the process of dying, so that as their consciousness enters eternity, they don't go into a hellish eternity with demonic forms overpowering them. That's what happens if you haven't gotten over your lust and greed and other selfish desires in life. So we've forgotten that. We're living in a secular materialist culture, and so all we care about is the material, physical world around us. And so what do we want? Well, we just want to keep that going without pain and in safety and security. That's all that's left to us. And so, these thinkers like Machiavelli and Hobbes, his thinking is all about the government is there to give you security against all of the evil, scary stuff out there, like the foreign armies, right? That's taken over. And so we have this secular materialist thinking that's produced this syndrome. The only way to get past this is to discover the reality that our consciousness is eternal, that this physical life is brief, that we are going to suffer and die. No amount of security will prevent that. It may delay it a little bit. So we shouldn't care so much about security. And that's, I think, the spiritual. This is one reason David Icke is so dangerous. I don't really see eye to eye with him really spiritually. I mean, he's not in the kind of monotheistic, Abrahamic, Sufi Islamic tradition I am. But he does get this. He understands that reality is much bigger than secular materialism tells us. And this is why I think he's so scary to the powers that be, more than any worry about Jews or what have you. So that's, I think, that the real issue at stake here. I think that this security fetish that you're talking about comes out of this secular materialist shift that the culture's undergone in the last couple of centuries.
Well, you might be surprised to learn that I don't disagree with any of that. Obviously, as an atheist, I define my atheism as I don't subscribe to the notion that a higher power created us to put us on earth to watch us develop and grow, and then to make a decision at the end of that on who goes to paradise and who doesn't. I reject that utterly. But I don't reject the idea that we are infinite awareness, infinite consciousness, and that there is something much bigger beyond this. So I completely agree with that. That's a brilliant explanation, I think, of what is very, very plausible for me. And why people are stuck in the rut that they're stuck in, that they don't understand that there is something much greater. I'm not saying that I can prove that, that Allah or God or Yahweh, whatever, doesn't exist. I can't. It's just what I feel. But I go along with you. And I think, again, you've very accurately maybe summed up why there are those that are very scared of people like David Icke and others, because they also subscribe to the likelihood that this is not the end, that this is some sort of illusory reality, that isn't what is, that isn't what is to come, that isn't the be-all and the end-all. No doubt, Kevin, I think you're absolutely spot on there. And it's an area of research that I'm, I don't have a great understanding of, obviously. I've tried to get into it with various researchers on the programme over the years. But yes, no, I 100% see where you're coming from. And it's a great rationalisation of why people, seek that security in that material secularism as you described it. And, people become more and more selfish and don't support one another, which of course serves the system, serves the establishment. It pisses me off. What should happen on Friday is that everybody decides not to go to that gig. Everybody who buys a ticket, if they learn of what has happened to Gilad, they say, no, I'm going to conscientiously object and not go in, because it's wrong that Gilad Atzmon is not there playing saxophone. But Kevin, this system is driving us further and further away from one another and loving one another and standing up for one another. That's where we're going, right? How do we bloody stop it in the last 5-10 minutes we have? How do we get people to think more about the person next to them? It's not just some fool that's on the subway with you, whom you might be annoyed with because he's got a sandwich and it might smell of pickles or whatever, or his radio might be a bit loud. He's important. You've got to engage with him. How do we get people to consider that going forward? That's $1 million question.
Well, the way you just put it was part of the answer, because if more people actually heard you saying that, they might stop and think about it a little bit. But I don't know. I think maybe at some point there's going to have to be a mass movement to get back into the real world, away from the internet. We're seeing right now that the bad guys see the potential of the internet to promulgate all sorts of forbidden truths, and that terrifies them. And that's why we've seen so much internet censorship over the past year, 2 years. But I think those people who are trying to censor the internet are, even though I despise them and what they're doing, I don't think they're entirely wrong, that there is something really negative going on with the way the internet has affected our consciousness. And I think a better way maybe to try to deal with that would be to make a real effort to get out of the internet. If we had a mass movement of people who were interested in talking about the kind of stuff that they read about on the internet, but talking face to face with other people about it, and suddenly we had all over the world people creating little meetups, in their homes or in the local library or local cafe, and discussing these different perspectives on things that on the internet turn into flame wars and degenerate into hate speech and racism and censorship and all these terrible things. Maybe if you're talking to a real human being across the cafe table from you or in the library room that you've got rented or gotten free from the library, and you can raise these topics, especially these kind of scary topics, with other human beings, maybe we could actually have better discussions of those topics. Plus, we could solve the problem that you're talking about. That is recognizing our neighbors and our fellow earthlings as human beings.
Do you know, Kevin, on that note, not to take this down into a seedy, down to seedy avenues or seedy corridor, but the biggest pornographic website in the world published its annual figures this week, and they said that they get about 100 million unique visits a day. 100 million. And I talked about this briefly last night because it's a brilliant illustration of what you're talking about. One of the great problems with over usage of internet porn or pornographic sites is that it destroys intimacy between couples. It does. It's a fact. Every study in the world has shown this. But not only that, it leads to erectile dysfunction problems and problems with ejaculation. That's all very scientific. Ultimately, it divides people. It separates people in a relationship. Isn't that incredible? and it's happening. 100 million people a day. And they don't want to be intimate with their physical, real human being, the man or woman that is right there in their house. They don't feel that desire to be intimate with them anymore. And that illustrates perfectly what you just said.
I agree completely, Richie. An activist I really respect just emailed me recently saying we should resist this mass shutdown of porn websites or purging of porn from YouTube or Facebook or whatever, because the structure of that purge is a lot like the purge of the so-called conspiracy theories. And I wrote back and said, no, I don't think so. I mean, yeah, the structure is the same, but the truth, that is forbidden truths, are good. Pornography is bad. And this actually highlights one of the good things about traditional religious morality in general, and Islam in particular, that it regulates desire in a way that it channels it into real, deep, lasting human relationships based on families, of course. And this destruction of the traditional family in this era of modern secular materialism has been a tragedy. It's left, half the kids don't have the two-parent family anymore here in the United States. And then we have this people with their sexuality plugged into the internet and no human relationships. So, yeah, that's terrible. And again, that's another reason to get off the internet, go to a meetup, talk about, say, David Icke or the Richie Allen Show or whatever at your local library, your local cafe, host at your home. Talk to some real human beings. We really do need to rebuild the human relationships because they are really being destroyed in this modern world.
No doubt. We might talk about that in the new year. I'd prefer to educate youngsters to stay away from these sites rather than to ban them, but I hear you loud and clear. We might get into that in the new year. Listen, I've been saying this to some of my regular guests in the last couple of weeks. Thanks for the time you've given us in 2018. You've never left us down. You've always said yes. And when you come on, you're always interesting. You're always well briefed. You always leave me thinking at the end of every segment. You always do, Kev. Go to truthjihad.com, folks. Kevin, give Rabia our best regards. Give her a kiss. And from all our listeners, Merry Christmas to you, to yours. I know you're a Muslim, but enjoy the holidays and a little bit of time off. Thanks for everything, and I can't wait to speak to you again in the new year. Thanks, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Richie. Great to be with you. And by the way, Muslims love Jesus just like Christians do.
Legend, mate. Thanks for everything. Speak to you in the new year, and Happy New Year as well. And a prosperous new year to you, Kevin, and to your family. The brilliant Kevin Barrett. Check out truthjihad.com. Lovely to hear from Kevin today. We're nearly at the end of the programme, by the way. An awful lot of tweets came in during the segment when I was speaking with Gilad and Kevin. I covered pretty much all of those points. I just saw one from David, Cartoon Drunk, about why did Kevin convert to Islam. I have gotten into that with Kevin on previous programs going way back. Maybe in the new year we'll get into that with Kevin. I also want to give a big shout out to Peter Kalchev, who's a friend and a big supporter of the program. Peter is also very interested in Kevin Barrett's writings, and he's a fan of Kevin's work. Peter sent me a lovely email the other day, and he wanted me to get into climate change with Kevin. I am going to do that, Peter, with Kevin in the new year, because Kevin is a proponent of man-made climate change theory. Ergo, Kevin disagrees with me, which is no bad thing. I will get into that with Kevin in the new year. In case Peter thinks that I completely ignored that email. I didn't, Peter. I will get into it with Kevin. And thanks to Peter Kalchev for being a supporter, a very vocal supporter of the programme, and a financial supporter of the programme as well. Peter, thanks, mate, and Merry Christmas to you. Now, I must mention again before I take my leave of you this Tuesday, back, of course, at the usual time tomorrow at 5, but later on this evening, in just over 90 minutes' time, I'm going to be a guest on the brilliant live stream presented by Gemma O'Doherty on her YouTube channel. It's something she does several times a week. It's on YouTube, and she's invited me to come and speak to her live this evening at 8:30 UK time, Irish time, and I've agreed to do that. We're going to have a general chat about a number of different things. I'm looking forward to it, very honoured to be invited. That's on youtube.com. Just go to youtube.com, look for Gemma O'Doherty, and you'll see a link to that live stream when it goes live. You might have had enough of me, and I don't blame you, and you might have no interest in watching that, but you should check out Gemma O'Doherty in general anyway. She's had a number of very interesting conversations. She always does, by the way. way. But I've been watching it very closely recently, and it's a really welcome new addition to independent media, uncensored, intellectual chat about subjects that the mainstream media either even suppresses or tries to I suppose label as very black and white issues. You know, these are things around race, around identity, politics, around the European Union, around the sovereignty of Ireland, all these issues that might get 5 minutes on the RTE News or on Irish radio or on British News or British radio, but she explores these subjects and expands, digs deep down into them with her guests, and as I said, a very welcome addition, I should say, to the independent media. I want to say a big thanks to Gilad Atzmon for coming on. Hopefully he'll be on stage with the Blockheads on Friday, all going well. Do sign the petition if you can. Go to gilad.co.uk for more information on that. Good luck to him. Thanks again to Kevin Barrett. Go to truthjihad.com. Read Kevin's books. Listen to his radio broadcasts. You just heard him. Very savvy, very, very intelligent man. Very well spoken, very humble. Check him out. That's it for Tuesday's programme. I'm going to finish with The Who. And say, as I always do, look after yourselves and one another. And we'll do it all again tomorrow, Wednesday. That's Wednesday, the 19th of December. The final programme, by the way, of 2018 will be this coming Sunday morning at 11 a.m. the 23rd of December. Will be the final programme. Can't wait for that this Sunday. We'll have a bit of fun Sunday morning. It's something a bit different on the Richie Allen Show. Leaving you with We Won't Get Fooled Again. Sadly, we probably will. Right? And I'll see you tomorrow. Join me with Gemma O'Doherty if you want at 8:30. Bye now.